Before we begin, I need to correct something. Something almost everyone gets wrong. When most people hear the phrase Mary cooked for Jesus, their minds immediately go to one woman, Mary of Nazareth, his mother, the woman who wrapped him in swaddling cloth,
the woman who sang over him in the night. And yes, when Jesus was a boy, she absolutely cooked for him.
Every morning, before the sun broke the horizon, she was already up, grinding grain, kneading dough, making sure her son was fed. She was there at the beginning of his life in ways most of us will never fully understand. But this story isn't about his childhood. This is about his ministry. Those 3 years when Jesus walked the roads of Galilee and Judea, teaching in synagogues, healing in alleyways, dining with sinners and saints alike. And during those 3 years, the woman who opened her home to him, who lit the fire, stirred the pot, and set the table, was not Mary, his mother. It was a woman named Martha, Martha of Bethany, sister of Mary and Lazarus.
A woman whose name has been overshadowed for centuries, reduced in many people's minds to a cautionary tale about being too busy to sit still.
But if you read Luke 10 carefully, verses 38 through 42, you see something remarkable. Martha opened her home. That is not a small thing. In first-century Palestine, hospitality was sacred. To open your home to a rabbi, to a teacher of Jesus' reputation, was an act of enormous faith, enormous courage, and enormous labor. Martha served, Martha prepared, Martha cooked. Her sister Mary sat at Jesus' feet and listened to him teach.
And Jesus gently, lovingly told Martha to slow down, not because what she was doing didn't matter,
but because the Son of God was sitting in her living room and she was missing it. So when I say Mary fed Jesus throughout his ministry, I really mean Martha. She's the one. She deserves the credit. She deserves the recognition. Now let's talk about what she actually made, the bread. Every single day began the same way, before the birds stirred, before the village woke up, before light touched the eastern hills. Martha was already on her knees, and she was making bread. Not sometimes, not most mornings, every morning, because bread wasn't a side dish in first-century Palestine. Bread was the meal. The Hebrew word for it, lehem, literally meant food. When someone said, "Let's go eat bread," they weren't being specific about what was on the menu. They were simply saying, "Let's eat," full stop, end of sentence. Scholars who studied the ancient Israelite diet estimate that bread made up somewhere between 50 and 70% of a person's daily caloric intake. Think about that. More than half of everything you consumed in a day came from one thing, bread. Everything else? The stew, the olives, the dried fruit, the cheese. Those were the accompaniments, the extras, the grace notes around the main melody. Bread was the foundation on which every meal was built, and making that bread was a woman's first act of every single day. Before Martha did anything else, before she drew water, before she planned the stew, before she thought about the evening meal, she reached into a large clay storage jar and pulled out barley grain. Not wheat, barley. This matters. Wheat was expensive. Wheat was the grain of the privileged, the wealthy landowner, the Roman official. Barley was coarser, denser, darker, and cheaper. It was the bread of the working class, the fisherman, the shepherd, the carpenter. And even though Martha's family had real wealth, we know this because in John chapter 12, her sister Mary anoints Jesus with a pound of pure nard,
a perfume worth a full year's wages, a staggering, almost reckless act of devotion. Even wealthy households kept barley on hand because it was practical.
It was filling. It was what the people around you ate, and in that world, you ate with your community. Martha would pour the grain into a heavy basalt stone mortar, a bowl worn smooth from years of daily use. Its surface darkened from thousands of mornings, just like this one. She'd take the pestle and begin to grind, slowly, methodically, cracking the hard kernels open, twisting, pressing, crushing them into rough flour. Not fine like what you'd find in a modern kitchen, coarse, textured. You could still feel bits of husk between your fingers when you rubbed the flour in your palm. This wasn't a 5-minute task. 20 minutes, 30 minutes, every single morning, just to get the flour ready. No machines, no shortcuts, just a woman, a stone bowl, and the sound of grain giving way before dawn. When the flour was ready, she pour it into a wide clay mixing bowl and push a well into the center. Then she tear in pieces of yesterday's dough, the sourdough starter, the leaven.
There was no packaged yeast, no little orange packets from the store.
You kept a piece of the previous day's dough, let it sit overnight, let it ferment, and used it to make the next batch rise. This was a cycle that never ended. The bread fed the people saved a piece of dough. The dough made tomorrow's bread. Then came the water drawn from the village well at dawn. Then a pour of olive oil, thick, golden green, almost luminous in the early morning light, pressed from the trees just beyond the village walls. Martha would work the dough with the heels of her palms, pressing forward, folding back, pressing again. 5 minutes, 7, 10, until the mass under her hands became smooth and elastic and alive, almost like it was breathing. She cover it with a cloth and let it rest for an hour. While the dough rose, she go out to the courtyard and light the taboon, a dome-shaped clay oven about 2.5 feet wide, lined inside with smooth, flat pebbles that had been gathering there for years. The fuel wasn't wood. Wood was scarce in that landscape, carefully rationed, too valuable to burn freely. She used dried animal dung, goat, cattle, mixed with straw and small twigs. That sounds rough. It sounds primitive. But dried dung burns slowly and evenly, producing steady, reliable heat that a skilled baker could read and control. She strike flint against stone, catch a spark in the dry straw, blow gently until the flames spread and strengthened, then seal the oven with a clay lid and let it heat for 30 or 40 minutes until the pebbles inside turned white hot. When the dough had doubled in size, she tear it into 5 or 6 pieces, flatten each one into a rough circle, maybe 7 or 8 inches across. Press dimples into the surface with her fingertips to keep it flat as it baked. Then she lay each round directly onto those scorching pebbles. The dough would sizzle on contact, a sharp, satisfying sound that meant everything was right. 2 or 3 minutes per side. The bottom would take the shape of the pebbles themselves, bumpy, cratered, deeply golden. She pull each flatbread out with quick, practiced bare fingers that had done this 10,000 times and knew exactly how, and stack them under a cloth to keep them soft and warm. That bread was breakfast. That bread was lunch. That bread was the foundation of dinner. Bread, every day, without exception. Breakfast, the first light meal. Breakfast itself was almost nothing by modern standards, and that was by design. The morning was for work, not for lingering over food. You ate quickly. You got moving. The day was long, and there was much to do. A piece of that fresh, still warm flatbread, torn and dipped in olive oil. A handful of olives, dark, wrinkled, cured in salt brine for weeks, their bitterness transformed into something complex and rich. Maybe a fig or two picked straight from the tree in the courtyard. Figs were everywhere in ancient Palestine, so common, so available, so connected to everyday life that in Matthew chapter 21, Jesus himself walks up to a fig tree, searching for a quick bite to eat. Not because he was being dramatic, just because that's what you did when you passed a fig tree. You grabbed one. Sometimes breakfast included a handful of parched grain roasted barley or wheat kernels, crunchy, nutty, darkened by heat, easy to carry, easy to eat, no preparation required. Ruth ate parched grain at her midday break in the harvest fields in the book of Ruth. Jesse sent it to his sons in the army. It was the ancient world's trail mix, dense, portable, quietly sustaining. If the household had cheese, it was soft and white and crumbly. Made from goat's milk curdled with a bit of dried animal stomach, the curds pressed into cloth and hung to drain overnight, similar to what we call labna today. Tangy, cool, eaten spread on bread or in small bites between sips of diluted wine. And then you were done. You rose from the floor, you tucked a portion of bread into a cloth pouch, and you went to work. The sun was coming up. There was no time to waste. Midday, the pause, not the meal. Midday wasn't really a meal. It was a moment of stillness in the middle of a relentless day. You didn't cook. You didn't sit down in any formal sense. You found a patch of shade, a rock at the edge of the field, a doorway, and you ate what you had brought with you. Bread from the morning, wrapped in cloth since dawn, a few olives, dried figs or dates, a handful of almonds or pistachios if you had them, a piece of cheese, and you dipped your bread in vinegar wine, a cheap sour drink, part refreshment, part condiment, that made the bread more palatable and cooled the body under the brutal midday sun. Ruth does this in the book of Ruth. Bread dipped in vinegar, eaten at the edge of someone else's field, in the dust and the heat. There is something quietly beautiful about that image, something human and humble and honest. For Jesus and his disciples, 12 men, sometimes more, walking the roads of Galilee from village to village under a sky that showed no mercy. This midday pause was probably all they had until evening.
And sometimes, even that wasn't available.
Luke chapter 6 tells us that the disciples would pluck raw grain from the fields as they walked through them, rubbing the heads between their palms and eating the kernels straight, not stealing. Deuteronomy chapter 23 specifically permitted travelers to eat from the edges of a field as they passed through.
You just couldn't bring a sickle. You couldn't harvest. You could only take what you could carry in your bare hands.
Dates were the energy bar of the ancient world, intensely sweet, sticky dark, packed with natural sugars that hit the bloodstream fast and kept you moving. Date cakes and raisin cakes were common traveling food. Pressed dried fruit, sometimes bound with honey and almonds, dense and sweet and made to last. In 1 Samuel chapter 25, Abigail brings 200 fig cakes and 100 raisin cakes to David and his men. That's not a snack. That's field rations for an army. That's knowing exactly what a body needs to keep going when the road is long and rest is far away.